Welcome to the Brief on Grieve. I am your host, Walter Sanderson. You know we come here each week for each episode to discuss grief and how it impacts each and all of us in our lives. On today, I have my co-host here with me, LATESHA, and we were going to be jumping right into it. So, LATESHA, for all of the viewers, please share a little bit about Ushered Into Healing and how it was founded.
Hi everyone, my name is LATESHA Renee, and Ushered Into Healing was birthed in pain and conceived in love. Ushered Into Healing is a nonprofit that I hold dear to my heart. It was in honor of my mom and dad, who both died due to cancer a year apart from one another. And Ushered Into Healing came about because I needed to have an emotional attachment to something that connected me to mom and dad. So that's how Ushered Into Healing came about. The foundation is a foundation that helps the homeless, but that was not my initial plan. My initial plan for Ushered Into Healing was to help people heal in whatever capacity was needed, whether it was you were sick, whether it needed an ear to hear, whether it was food. It wasn't going to be just for the homeless. But in the midst of starting the business, the lady that was helping me with my paperwork, she was like, LATESHA, you have to have a focal point. Healing can't be everything.
Okay.
So the reason why I chose homelessness is because I went to a show at Radio City Music Hall. And this was after my mom and dad had died, and I was taken to the show to cheer me up. So after the show, my friends and I, we were leaving to go to the car, and they were walking ahead of me. I was kind of tagging along, walking by myself, and there was this homeless woman sitting near Radio City Music Hall, and I stopped. And I offered her money, and she said no. I offered to buy her food, and she said no. And out of nowhere, I just had the urge to offer a hug.
Okay.
And I hugged her, and she said to me, you don't know how long it's been since someone has touched me. So when I caught up with my friends, they were like, oh, what happened to you? Where were you? I said, oh, I was just back there. I gave that lady a hug. And when I turned my head, she was gone. I don't know what that was, but when I turned my head, the lady was nowhere in sight. So when it came time to find the focal point, I chose to work with them on this.
Okay. Well, first, I will say that I really admire the work you're doing. I admire your strength to move forward in losing both of your parents to create your organization and Ushered Into Healing. What I want to ask, though, is people will see you now with the Ushered Into Healing, how you're dealing with your grief and losing both parents. What was that process like, and how did we get from the day I lost them to the point now where I am doing this, helping the homeless, helping people that are grieving? How do we get there, and what is that process like?
I got here by accident.
Okay.
I got here through survival mode.
Okay.
I had to find a way to allow my parents' death to have meaning.
Okay.
To have purpose. Otherwise, I don't know what state I would be in, because it was very difficult. I was very close with both of my parents, and for the roles to reverse, where now I am the caretaker along with my older brother, we are the caretakers for our parents. For those roles to reverse is very traumatic, honestly, for me to be in position to be bathing both my parents, feeding them, and tending to their needs. It was, looking back, it was a traumatic experience. At the time, I'd do it all over again. It was a humbling experience, and I honored them so much. I had no problem serving them. I had no problem caring for them, but it was a humbling experience. And from that point on to here, I think I was forced to not so much be strong. The word for me is not strong. I was first forced to go into survival mode, because I knew that other people depended on me. So first my mom died. Both my mom and dad had cancer at the same time. So first my mom died. Following my mom, my dad died, but it was a year stretch.
Okay.
So with my mom dying, I wasn't put in a position to grieve. I wasn't put in a position to mourn. I was put in a position of, okay, mom's gone, but dad's still here. Dad still needs you. Dad still has cancer. So I wasn't placed in a position to even own my grief. And fast forward, after my dad died, I was just in a place of, what do I call it? For alcoholics, it's called functional alcoholics. So for me, I was a functional griever, maintaining my day-to-day, getting the bills paid, going to work, same routine day in, day out. Couldn't wait to get home just to get under the covers. But it came to a point where I noticed that I wasn't growing.
Okay.
I wasn't flourishing. I was just at a standstill.
Now, how do you, because you're going through it, how do you really find it out? Like, because sometimes people can go through that process and there's somebody that has to tap them on the shoulder and go, hey, you're not doing this. Was there somebody that did that for you, or something that you just realized over time?
It was something that I had realized over time. You kind of sometimes get sick and tired of being sick and tired, or sick and tired of being stuck, and just realizing, like, I was in the same space last year. I was in the same place last year. Like, I'm busy, but I realized my busy was distraction. And I didn't realize that until my brother brought it to my attention. He's like, you're traveling here, you're traveling there, you're always on the run, you're always going. And he was like, that's just a distraction. What? What? But in reality, he was right.
He was right, because a lot of times I find that with people, and sometimes people do it intentionally, and sometimes you don't know it. When it comes to grief, sometimes you can have people that try to adapt, and then they have a process called as maladaptive, where you distinctly go or deliberately say, I'm going to do this so I don't have to deal with that. And for you probably was just trying to find something that was giving you some peace of mind, something to help you relax, help you think straight, if you will. And then he was able to see that from the outside. What I want to say, and I want to ask this question, because you said something, and I did an episode recently. My last episode was on comparative grief. And you said something there that struck a chord with me, and I want to ask this is, you said that when you lost your mom, there really wasn't much time or space for you to grieve, because you still had to be the caretaker for your dad. My argument for comparative grief is you never can compare people to yourself when you're losing people. But speaking to somebody who has lost two people, would it be fair to say that people shouldn't compare? Because in one instance, you may have grieved, let's say your mother, hypothetically, more than your dad. You could have, but you weren't allowed to. And so, if you will, can you explain or share a little bit of what the experiences was like grieving mom versus dad?
So, grieving mom versus dad. One thing I would say, as far as comparative grief, you really can't compare, because each situation is unique based on your relationship with the person that died.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And even though I said I didn't have the time or the moment to grieve because I had to care for my dad, looking back, it's like, would I even have known how to grieve? This is the closest person to my heart, my mom, and then my dad, the closest person to my heart. How do you even grieve that? How do you even make sense of, tomorrow I gotta live another day, but they won't be here with me to join me? So me grieving, I guess in a sense, it was a learning process. People think that when you grieve you have to cry. For a long time I didn't cry.
Okay.
And it wasn't intentional. It just, I'm in autopilot mode. I'm doing, a functional griever. I didn't have time, or I didn't make the time to sit and really cry. Although I did cry when I wrote.
Okay.
So I got into
So when you write, what made you start writing? Was writing part of your process? Is it something that you always have done?
It honestly just overcame me one day. I think it was the following day. Well, it could have been the same day that my mom died, and I just had my phone at the time, and I'm just writing how I feel about her.
Okay.
It's like, in a sense, I was expressing to her how I felt. Maybe in some strange way, feeling that her spirit would pick it up and understand what I was feeling.
Okay.
But it was possibly therapeutic for me because I was releasing it, where I got into the habit of every day I'm writing. I'm writing about my love for my mom and writing about not understanding what has happened. And then it got to a point where one time I missed a day.
Okay.
And I started to feel guilty.
Okay.
Like, oh, I missed a day. And then I said, no, I'm not going to own that feeling of guilt because it doesn't take away from the fact that I love my mother dearly. It's just time slipped away. I had to care for my dad. So I did catch that little trigger.
Okay.
Because you could fall into that gap and never get out. But writing was therapy for me, where it just, it's like God was uploading stuff in me and it was just coming out. Like when you go back and read it, I'm like, I couldn't have wrote that. But it was a deep, profound love that I had for my mom, where I was able to express it on paper.
Okay.
And released just for a moment.
Okay.
It gave me a sense of release.
Have a question. You know I'm a pastor.
I did.
And I know you are a faithful woman of God. My question would be, if you weren't saved, you didn't have a relationship with God the way you do, do you believe your grief would have been more difficult? And let me just say this, it's not a trick question. I'm asking this question for anybody that's going to view this that will walk away saying, it's only because of that. It's only because of this. And I want them to go that there are no tangible things that sometimes you can just hold on to, that you have to find your way. And so I want to know if any has your faith impacted the way you grieve.
I definitely had to find my way through this process because in the beginning, of course, I did my praying. I recited scripture every day. I'm giving scripture to my mom for her to believe in. She's believing in it. And I promise you, I had no doubt that my mother was not going to die. When she was in hospice and the nurses told me, to be prepared because of what they were seeing, I looked at the nurse like, that woman doesn't know what she's talking about. She means well, but no, not here. So when my mother died in my arms, I was dumbfounded. Like, and the fact that, looking back now, it's like, LATESHA, how could you not see the signs? God totally blinded me from that. But looking back on it now, it's like, I don't know how I really got through that space.
Okay.
I did have a hard time because, like I said, I referred to the scripture. So when she died, I had a hard time accepting the fact that she was gone because I really did believe that she was going to live. So I wrestled with that. I won't say I was angry with God. I would say I was very confused about what had just transpired.
Which is okay, and it's okay to be angry with them as well.
Right. But that's
something that the church don't preach enough about, but go ahead.
For me, that wasn't the emotion. I was just totally confused, but at the same extent, my confusion had to be limited because Dad was here, right? But I wrestled with it for a long time. And one of the things that you had said to me, you put in my ear like you do, was, who's to say God didn't really keep his word? Who's to say that her healing was here? Who's to say that her healing wasn't on the other side? Now, of course, I didn't want to hear that because I want her physically here with me. But in all honesty, it's been 10 years since my mom died. In all honesty, I can say that I gained another piece of my mom in her death.
Wow.
It's like I still have her in another light, if that makes sense. And a lot of people may not be able to understand that.
It makes sense because your sense. It makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it took time. It didn't happen overnight. It took time where I'm in a good space now with the transition of my dad, with the transition of my mom, and now my grandmother, my mother's mother died 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm in a good space of acceptance now, because I really did gain another sense of them, which is empowering and which helps me make it from day to day.
Okay.
So what you see is not just because of me, it's because of my faith in God, and it's because of my belief in the Spirit, and the Spirit that dwells within lives on.
Okay. So I want to ask this first. I think it's amazing of how you were able to move forward. I think it's an amazing and inspiring that you would start and began to help people in the moment that you probably needed the most help yourself. And so what does your grief look like now? Because mom transitions, we're still the caretaker for dad. And we don't really have, I don't want to say we don't have the room or the capacity. I would say we don't have enough time to focus on our grieving because we still have someone there. So when you lose your dad, how heavy is the grief now? Because it almost would seem as if I really haven't finished grieving over here and moving forward, and now I have to grieve both of them together. What's that like?
Grieving both of them at the same time.
At the same time.
You know how they talk about the black cloud? People talk, when they make a comparison of the black cloud, I know what that feels like.
Okay.
It was like a black cloud. So the same week that my dad died was the same week of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
No, the same week of his funeral was the same week of Thanksgiving. And a friend of mine had offered me to go on their cruise. And being that I was no longer the caretaker of mom and dad, I was now an orphan.
Okay.
I made it to go on the cruise, and during that time, I spent a lot of time by myself. I spent a lot of time near the water, and on the last day of the cruise, when the ship docked to come back home, an overwhelming, consuming darkness overcame me. I can't even explain what it was, but when the ship docked, it was like in my mind, I said, what am I supposed to do now? What am I supposed to do with this now? And I didn't know. I didn't know what my next move was going to be. I didn't know what my next step was going to be, because 2 years I was caretaker. 2 years my life wasn't my own, which was fine. My life was dedicated to keeping my parents comfortable, and my ultimate goal was to see them healed here on this side. So when that didn't happen and they died, it was like I didn't know how to carry that space. So each day really was a gamble, I didn't know. I didn't plan ahead of what the next day would be. It just was.
You shared something that I think is important, because I know some people may say, well, as a pastor, as a friend of yours, that they may say and look at this and go, well, I can't believe he said that to her in the midst of people trying to encourage her, if you will, saying, mom is going to make it, she's going to be healed. My response at the moment was never one to be insensitive. It was one to always give you a clear look at the entire picture. I believe, especially from a spiritual perspective, that oftentimes we pray for something we want, but deep down we really never know the person we're grieving over, how much they are grieving the state they are in and what they are asking for. And so what I want to make clear to a lot of the viewers, even from a pastoral perspective, which I don't do a lot on my podcast, is understand that God honors prayers, and it is quite possible that the person you were grieving over or have been grieving over, they ask God for something too. And oftentimes we walk away because we go, God didn't do it. Or maybe he did, he just didn't give you your desire, but maybe he gave them theirs. And because I can't believe, knowing you, knowing your mom, knowing your family, how much they would have appreciated that it's not grief for the person that is in the state that my daughter has to do all this for me. Grieving the fact that, let's say, I feel like my daughter shouldn't have to do this, and they may be asking for something too in their grief.
This is true.
So,
if I may,
yes,
that speaks a lot to who my mom was.
absolutely.
That speaks a lot to who my mom was, because in the latter days when she had got back from the hospital, she was just staring at me, and I'm like, "Why are you staring at me?" She's like, "I'm just waiting for you. I'm waiting for you to come lay with me." And I know at one point she had said, "This is too much for you." Like, "Mom, what are you talking about? This is not too much." She's like, "No, you're getting like 10 minutes of sleep here and there. You're taking care of me. You're taking care of Dad. This is too much for you." I'm like, "Mom, I promise you this is not too much for me." And I honestly believe sometimes we have a choice of whether or not we're going to be here, if we want to leave, depart. And I honestly believe my mom felt it was too much for myself, too much for my brother to take care of both of them at the same time, because it entailed, lifting, it entailed cleaning, and I promise you, it wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a struggle, but I do believe in my mom's eyes it was too much, and she decided to depart. So I did come to terms with that. Like, no, my mom didn't want to be in that state and have her children to care for her like this for a long period of time. And then, of course, my dad, he let us know from the beginning, like, I don't want to be here anymore. He and my mom were married over 40 plus years, so he made it clear. And going through it with my mom and dad, going through it with my mom, my brother and I had an intervention with Dad and said, "Dad, you knew Mom before we knew Mom. I already know the love I have for her. I can't even imagine the amount of love you have for her. Now that she's gone, how do you even tackle that?" But my brother and I asked him, "Please give us more time." He gave us exactly a year, a month, and 18 days.
Wow.
And when he transitioned, I was okay.
Wow. And see, and this is what I mean sometimes when people try to compare grief. It's not comparable, as you have stated, because relationships matter, timing matters, support system matters. And so here we have Mom, and this is the first time. Like myself, my grandmother, from that magnitude, I had lost my aunt some years prior, but my grandmother was the first one that really hit me hard. And so at this time, I don't really have a support system around me. But I think that it's fair to say that we learn, like you said, we learn on the fly. We learn because in life, my grandmother used to say something to me, and it didn't make sense to me until sitting here with you right now. She said, grief is like, losing people is like a boxer. And I'm watching these two boxers. I'm a Bud Crawford fan for all of you that are out there, but a couple of weeks back, two gentlemen come into the ring. Errol Spence, Bud Crawford get in there. Bud Crawford wins, and Errol Spence loses. And my grandmother used to always say, when these boxers lose, nobody prepares for loss in their life. And so we got to pick up the pieces. And so I like to believe that Mom is the first loss on your record, as impactful as it was. And Dad, someone can't look and go, well, because of how you grieve Mom, then that means you love your mom more and you grieve her harder, or vice versa. The reality of it is that you were prepared now of what this would be like, what this road is like when my dad comes and his time is to transition. And if I may, Mom, in a sense, gave you her perspective of, I think this is too much, and so the battle is, Mom, it's not too much for me. I like doing this. And if I am to be honest and transparent, I know your dad said he wanted to be with her. He missed her. So on one end, it may be a little easier to accept Dad, because Dad going, I want to be with, if I will, his sweets. I want to be with her. And you really can't argue with that when you and your brother are sitting there going, this is the love of his life. But I can go back and forth with my mom. And so these just different stages. And in his perspective, I don't even think many people pay attention sometimes to what it's like to be grieving your daughter having to take care of you, having to grieve the fact as a man not being able to be as functional as you used to, and your son has to do things for you. Also grieving the fact that your wife has gone and transitioned already. And then the 2 children are grieving the gentleman. Like, it is so layered, and that's why I never like people to compare, because somebody on the outside would look at you and your brother and go, well, I've lost my parents. But what capacity? How did you lose them? You were caretaking, you were watching them. Was there a situation where both of their parents was 100 years old and they go, well, I knew at some point? So the comparative piece of it is one that I believe you could speak to, because outside of comparing ourselves with other people, even in our own lives, we can't even compare our grief individually. You wouldn't even hearing you talk, compare dad's loss to mom's loss. You would just talk about each loss. So I guess my final question for you would be this: for somebody watching that admires your strength and they're saying, that's her. She was able to do that. She was able to start ushering into healing. She was able to start ushering into healing because I believe she's gotten over it and gotten past it and she's healed. What do you say to that person that says, I can't do what you did? What's your response?
What I have learned is healing is a mindset. And the first step is wanting it.
Absolutely, yes.
The first step is making a decision that I want different. I want to feel different. And I think for me, I knew my mom and dad wouldn't want me to be in a state where I'm constantly under the covers. I'm constantly like, just numb. Like, things could be happening, I'm oblivious to it because I'm in a fog. I'm a functional griever. I do what I gotta do. I'm back home. I'm in a total fog. And I wouldn't look at it so much as strength. Because like I said, I was just navigating through this and learning as I go, because I knew that other people depended on me. If other people didn't depend on me, would I still function the way that I function? I don't know. I really don't know. But I did make a choice of healing. I want to feel what healing feels like, because I felt this way for so long. I felt this hurt, this pain, this ache for so long. I want to experience something different.
Okay.
And when I allow myself to experience something different by forming Ushered Into Healing, or by doing something in honor of my parents, it kind of started to chip away at the grief.
Okay.
So what I mean by that was, my parents' death didn't make sense to me. For me, they didn't deserve it. No one feels like their loved one deserves to die. And I definitely didn't feel like they deserved to die in the way that they did as far as suffering. So for me, I needed to make sense of their death. I needed to make it make sense. Otherwise, this mind of mine was going to go places I don't know if it would have been able to return.
Okay.
So I needed to make my parents' death make sense. And here it is 10 years later, their death makes sense because of their dying, I have formed Ushered Into Healing. I've done other ventures where I help people that are sick.
Okay. As
far as illnesses, I help them as far as coming up with regimens and routines to help heal from within. So because that my parents went through that, I had to find purpose within my pain. I had to find purpose within my pain so that their death wouldn't be in vain, and me dying wouldn't add to that, if it makes sense. So I had to turn my pain into purpose. I had to turn my pain into passion to make sense of their death. And I always honor them. I always say, thank you, Mom and Dad, for your sacrifice. Because of your sacrifice, I have learned different modalities of healing. Because of your sacrifice, other people are in position to heal because of what I learned, helping them. So I always honor them. So I would encourage people to find a way to turn that pain, use it as fuel to turn it into something inspiring in honor of your loved one. Does that make sense?
It does.
But it's a choice. It's a choice, and it's not an easy choice to make because, you know, it's easy to get stuck in isolation. That becomes your comfortable
Absolutely.
space because people don't know how to converse with you. People don't know how to handle your grief. So it's just easier for me to just be quiet and stay in this bubble. But I promise you, if you allow yourself to step out of the bubble and experience something new, experience something different, the tipping scale occurs. Your grief and your joy. Joy comes back where you get to balance it out. And the more you gear your pain to a purpose and power and honor of your loved ones, the more the chipping away of the grief. The more you handle grief differently, where you'll find your joy is starting to outweigh your grief. But I don't want you to get caught in a place where you feel guilty for feeling happy. I was in a position where I started, hey, what am I doing happy? Mom and dad are gone. But then I said, well, mom and dad wouldn't want me sad.
They would have wanted you.
Right. So it is possible with time to get to a place where you are able to experience joy while still maneuvering and navigating through this jungle of grief. And the more you focus on turning your pain into passion and fuel, the more the tipping scales it balances, and then it starts to rise where your joy outweighs your grief, if that makes sense.
Yes. And thank you. And I will say this. You are not the only ones that are thankful to your parents. Everybody you inspire, everybody you talk to, everybody you help, everybody you speak to, whether it's on your podcast or in conferences, they are thankful to them as well. And for the viewers, I want to say it was a pleasure sitting with my co-host, not just from her strength, but also for her message. I would also like to say she made one thing I want you to take away, and she said, it's something you decide. And I'm telling you why, regardless of how tough, and it will be hard, but you decide because you deserve it. Decide because you deserve it. Well, that's it for this episode on the Brief on Grief. And I want to share this with you as I always do. We always know somebody that is grieving, and that somebody might be you. See you next time on the Brief on Grief.